The roar of an engine splits the night open, a sound not from a movie set, but from a real track under a real sky. This is where Paul Newman, the man whose eyes held the geography of American cool, found his only true sanctuary. For him, the racetrack was a confessional booth at 200 miles per hour, the one place where the ghosts of Hollywood couldn't keep up. Speed was a mechanical prayer, a state of focus so absolute it burned away the anxieties, the regrets, the pressure. Every corner, every gear shift was a moment of pure, unforgiving truth. The world knew him through the lens of a camera, a legend whose name was synonymous with charm, charisma, and undeniable talent. But on the track, he was not Paul Newman, the movie star. He was just a man, a driver, confronting the immutable laws of physics. He was a champion in his own right, a fact that surprised many who only saw the face on the posters. But on one November night in 1978, not even the fastest car in the world could outrun what was coming. The phone rang, and in a single shattering breath, everything beautiful collapsed. The world's most famous blue eyes, once a symbol of defiant life, were now clouded by a storm no one could see. A legend had been brought to his knees not by a cinematic villain but by the quiet, devastating finality of a voice on the line. One chapter of his life had ended abruptly and brutally, and the next would be written in the ink of grief and redemption. The world watched, but few understood the full, devastating weight of that moment. The public saw a tragic story, but they didn't see the man who felt he had failed. They saw a father's sorrow, but they didn't see the ghost of his own past staring back at him. They saw the end of a young man's life, but they didn't see the silent blame and the unbearable regret that now became Paul Newman's constant companion. What really happened that night? Could there be a hidden truth beneath what we've been told about the man who had it all? The story of Paul Newman begins not with the scream of tires, but with the clipped green lawns of Shaker Heights, Ohio, a place of quiet conformity where his life was a study in contrasts. Born in 1925, he was the son of Arthur Newman Sr., a pragmatic man who ran a successful sporting goods store and viewed his son's artistic aspirations as a frivolous diversion. There was a chasm of unspoken distance between father and son, a coldness that Newman would spend his life trying to understand. His mother, Teresa, a Catholic immigrant from Hungary, was the opposite. She saw his striking beauty and harbored her own unfulfilled artistic dreams, pushing him towards the Cleveland Playhouse. But her encouragement came with a deep psychological wound. Newman later recalled with a startling coldness that his mother viewed him as a decoration, a beautiful object to be admired, not a person to be known. This early lesson, that his worth was tied to his appearance, planted a seed of profound, lifelong insecurity. He was the boy with the face, but he desperately wanted to prove he was more than that. The boy with the perfect face learned early to hide his imperfections, to build a wall between the charming exterior and the anxious interior. The silence from his father and the objectification from his mother created a man who craved connection, but feared being truly seen. Could their early childhood experiences have laid the foundation for later triumphs or tragedies? A simmering unease with the mundane, a yearning to be an outsider, led him to the Navy during World War II. His dream of being a fighter pilot was dashed by a diagnosis of color blindness, a cruel twist of fate that kept him from the adrenaline-fueled glory he sought. Instead, he became a radio man and turret gunner on an Avenger torpedo bomber. It was during this time in the Pacific that a different, more chilling kind of fate intervened. A pilot on his crew developed an ear infection, grounding their plane for a mission. Days later, the rest of their squadron, sent to the aircraft carrier USS Bunker Hill, was wiped out in a kamikaze attack. That random twist of fate, an earache, saved his life. This brush with mortality left an indelible mark, a quiet understanding of the sheer randomness of existence and the survivor's guilt that would forever follow him. It was a theme that would echo throughout his life and career, the feeling that he was living on borrowed time, that he was somehow undeserving of his good fortune. After the war, he attended Kenyon College on the GI Bill. He studied drama, drank beer, and played football until a barroom brawl got him kicked off the team. That flash of the rebellious spirit that would later define his screen persona was the final push he needed. He threw himself entirely into the theater, a world where he could finally explore the complexities he felt inside, a place where a handsome face wasn't enough. It was a quest for authenticity that would define him, a lifelong struggle to reconcile the image with the man. The journey to stardom was a grueling, unglamorous climb, and it was during this period that his personal life was a mirror of his professional struggles. After college, he moved his young family, his first wife, Jackie Witt, and their 3 young children, to Connecticut to study at the prestigious Yale School of Drama. The demands of family life clashed with his artistic ambitions. He was juggling the high-minded theory of the stage with the stark reality of dirty diapers and mounting bills. Newman, deeply insecure about his intellect, felt out of place at Yale, often perceiving himself as not the brightest. He would later admit, "I wasn't the brightest, but I could burn through focus like no one else," a testament to his relentless drive to compensate for what he perceived as his shortcomings. This insecurity was a powerful engine, pushing him to work harder than his more naturally gifted peers. From Yale, it was on to the hallowed halls of the Actors Studio in New York, the crucible of method acting. He was accepted into the elite group led by Lee Strasberg, a place where Marlon Brando and James Dean were forging a new, raw style of American performance. Newman, with his classic good looks and collegiate background, felt like an outsider. He believed his face was a liability, a barrier to being taken seriously. He worked tirelessly, honing his craft on live television dramas, the unforgiving medium that served as a crucible for a generation of actors. The television screen was a stage for his relentless ambition, a place where he could prove he was more than just a pretty face. All the while, his marriage to Jackie was quietly fracturing under the pressure. The struggles of a budding actor and the demands of raising a young family created a deep, irreparable rift, a painful chapter that he would rarely speak of publicly. Then Hollywood called. His debut was in a biblical epic called The Silver Chalice, a film of such staggering mediocrity that it became a source of lifelong shame. Clad in a short toga he derisively called a cocktail dress, he delivered his lines with a pained stiffness. He was so horrified that years later he spent his own money on trade paper ads apologizing for the film. It was a searing humiliation, confirming his deepest fear that he was a fraud. But this brutal introduction to Hollywood forged in him a deep humility and a relentless work ethic. The failure was a fire that burned away his naivete, leaving behind the hardened steel of a man who would never take success for granted. He fought for better roles, proving his mettle on Broadway in the hit play, The Desperate Hours. His breakthrough came when he was cast as the boxer Rocky Graziano in Somebody Up There Likes Me. Newman poured all of his insecurity and restless energy into the part, and the result was electrifying. A star was born. Finally, the world didn't just see the face, they saw the fire behind it. He was no longer a decoration. He was a force of nature. Was the success he achieved truly worth all the pain he endured to get there? The fire behind the eyes, once ignited, became a supernova. The 1960s and 70s saw Paul Newman ascend to a level of stardom that few ever reach. He wasn't just an actor, he was a cultural touchstone. He was Fast Eddie Felson in The Hustler, a brilliant, self-destructive pool shark whose cool was a thin armor over a wounded soul. He was the amoral, charismatic rancher in HUD, a man so magnetic you almost rooted for him even as he poisoned everything he touched. And he was the unbreakable spirit of Cool Hand Luke, the defiant prisoner whose smile became a symbol of rebellion against an unjust system. These weren't just roles. They were archetypes he embodied, shaping a new kind of American masculinity. Rugged, intelligent, and profoundly ambivalent about authority. His on-screen chemistry with Robert Redford in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Sting was legendary. A perfect fusion of wit and charm that created some of the most iconic moments in cinematic history. Their friendship was a rare thing in Hollywood, a bond built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of the bizarre nature of their fame. They were cinematic soulmates, a duo whose relaxed improvisational energy felt less like acting and more like a private conversation the audience was lucky enough to overhear. This friendship became an antidote to the chaos of the industry, a small community of two in a world of a million faces. He was a box office titan, a critical darling, and a commercial powerhouse all at once. The piercing blue eyes were everywhere. A global phenomenon that sold movie tickets, magazines, and an idealized version of the American dream. But the light of fame casts a long, dark shadow. The man the world saw was a perfect picture, a poster boy for effortless cool. But the man behind the picture was a deeply conflicted, anxious soul. Behind all that glamour was there an unbearable loneliness that nobody saw. In the eye of this hurricane was Joanne Woodward. Theirs was not a typical Hollywood marriage. It was a partnership of equals, a collaboration of mind and spirit. She was a brilliant Oscar-winning actress in her own right, a woman of fierce intelligence who saw the anxious, striving man behind the icon. Joanne was the truth in his life, the one person who could look past the celebrity and see the person who still felt like a fraud. She was his sounding board, his fiercest critic and his most loyal advocate. Their love story, which began on the set of The Long Hot Summer, was a defiance of Hollywood norms, a relationship that was intellectual and artistic as much as it was romantic. He trusted her judgment implicitly, and it was her influence that encouraged his creative pursuits beyond acting. He was not just her husband, he was her creative partner, her champion. This dynamic was never more evident than when he directed her in the film Rachel, 1968, a quiet, profound drama about a middle-aged schoolteacher. Newman's direction was masterful and understated, focusing on Joanne's brilliant performance. The film was a critical sensation, earning her an Academy Award nomination and him a nod for Best Director. It was a profound act of humility, a husband using his newfound influence not to further his own career but to illuminate his wife's extraordinary talent. He never sought to overshadow her, always letting Joanne shine, and in doing so, he showed the world a side of himself that was generous, strategic, and deeply in love. After the chaos of Hollywood, they would retreat to their 18th-century farmhouse in Westport, Connecticut. It was their fortress against the phoniness of fame, a place where he could be Paul, not Paul Newman. There he found fleeting moments of peace covered in sawdust in his wood shop, meticulously crafting his own salad dressing in the kitchen, or just holding Joanne's hand after a long day of planting tomatoes. For a second, in these stolen moments of normalcy, he looked like a man not haunted by anything. But these moments were islands in a turbulent sea. The pressure of being a global icon was immense. He wrestled his demons in private. The drinking became a ritual, a case of beer a day to quiet the noise in his head. His elaborate, often destructive pranks, like sawing a producer's desk in half or having a wrecked car delivered to a friend's house, were legendary. They were not just jokes. They were acts of rebellion against the solemnity and control of an industry he often disdained. The fame felt like a cage, the adulation directed at a person he didn't recognize. The insecurity that began in his mother's living room in Shaker Heights was now amplified on a global scale. He felt like an imposter, famous for a face he never asked for. And so, he would flee to the racetrack. The roar of the engine was his escape, a way to keep the ghosts of Hollywood behind him. But there was one ghost he could never outrun. His political consciousness, too, was a powerful counter-narrative to his celebrity. He was not a quiet Hollywood liberal. He was a vocal opponent of the Vietnam War and a fervent supporter of the civil rights movement, using his platform to speak out against injustice. This defiance came at a cost. His name appeared on President Nixon's infamous enemies list, a badge of honor he wore with defiant pride. He was a man who refused to be just a handsome face, even when it was the easier, more lucrative path. He was a rebel both on screen and off, and this deep-seated need to challenge the status quo defined his life as much as his films. The simmering anxieties that ran beneath the surface of his golden life were not just demons to be managed. They were fault lines, trembling with the pressure of a secret internal war. And on November 20th, 1978, the ground gave way completely. The news of Scott Newman's death was not just a tragedy, it was an indictment, a brutal reckoning with the hidden costs of a life lived in the stratosphere of fame. Scott was a young man who had spent his entire life grappling with the double-edged sword of his father's name. He'd tried to follow in his footsteps, appearing alongside him in The Towering Inferno and taking roles in other films. But the shadow was too long, too vast. He turned to stunt work, to skydiving, to a life of high-stakes risk, as if daring fate to prove he was his own man. The relationship between father and son was fraught with complexity, a deep, abiding love tangled with frustration and misunderstanding. Paul tried to help, to guide him, but his attempts were often perceived by Scott as the controlling hand of a famous father, not the helping hand of a dad. The final hours of Scott's life were a heartbreaking portrait of his struggle. He'd been in a motorcycle accident, and the pain was real. But so was the access to prescription drugs in the freewheeling culture of the late 1970s. A party, a mixture of Valium, alcohol, and other narcotics, it was a familiar tragic cocktail that proved fatal. The phone call to Paul delivered the news, but the real blow was the silence that followed, a silence filled with the deafening roar of regret. He lost his son, but what haunted him most was the possibility that he'd already lost him years before in quiet increments of distance, in conversations they never had. He later admitted publicly with searing honesty, "I wasn't present enough. I thought I was giving him room, but I was building a wall." The specter of his own high-functioning alcoholism, of the emotional armor he wore as a defense against the world, now felt like a weapon that had inadvertently wounded his own child. A terrible thought began to form, a whisper of parental fear that would never leave him. "I thought he saw me as a hero. Now I wonder if he only saw distance." The world knew him as Cool Hand Luke, a man who could not be broken. But he was broken now, shattered into a million pieces of guilt and sorrow. This was not a plot from one of his films. This was a raw, gaping wound in the heart of his life, a wound that would never fully heal. Did this tragic event mark his downfall? Or was it simply the tipping point of deeper problems that had been festering for a lifetime? In the suffocating silence of his grief, Paul Newman had to find a way to breathe again. The racetrack, once a sanctuary, now offered no escape. The roar of the engine was just a hollow echo of the turmoil in his own mind. He could not undo the past. He could not bring his son back. So he did the only thing a man drowning in guilt can do. He tried to build something from the wreckage. He turned his private agony into a public crusade. Pouring his pain, his resources, and his famous name into a new cause, he founded the Scott Newman Center. a foundation dedicated to preventing drug abuse through education and awareness. It was an act of a desperate father, a public admission of his own failures, an attempt to save other families from the torment that had befallen his own. It was a mission born from the deepest point of his pain, a way to shout a warning into the void where his son's life used to be. He wasn't doing it to honor his son, but to pay a debt he felt he owed. But his transformation didn't stop there. In 1982, in a barn on his Connecticut property, a different kind of alchemy took place. As a joke, he and his friend, the writer A.E. Hotchner, bottled some of his homemade salad dressing to give away as Christmas gifts. The dressing, with its wine vinegar and secret spices, was a hit. Friends and neighbors came back demanding more. A local grocer asked to stock it. An idea sparked, initially as a lark, but it quickly morphed into something profound. They would sell the dressing, and in a decision that would define the rest of his life, Newman declared with absolute certainty that every single cent of the after-tax profits would be given away to charity. Newman's Own was born. The label itself was a reflection of his irreverent humor, a drawing of his face in a pinstripe suit with the motto, "Fine food since February." It was his ultimate act of defiance and redemption. He called it the shameless exploitation in pursuit of the common good. If his image had brought him fame and fortune, he would now leverage that very image for pure, unadulterated good. This was a legacy far more meaningful to him than any Oscar. It was a way to create something joyful and generative from an unbearable loss, a way to honor his son's memory by helping thousands of sick children and countless other causes. It was his second act, and it was entirely his own creation. The Newman's Own company was not a mere business. It was a non-profit ecosystem, a revolutionary model of philanthropy. It started with salad dressing but expanded to a vast array of products: pasta sauce, pizza, lemonade, popcorn, and cookies. Over the decades, Newman's Own has generated over $600 million for thousands of charities, a stunning and unprecedented testament to his vision. He didn't keep a single cent of the profits. This was not a celebrity hobby. It was his life's true work. This newfound depth began to bleed into his work. He was no longer just a movie star. He was a man who had stared into the abyss. He began to channel his own pain into his characters, demonstrating a new level of emotional honesty. In The Verdict, he played a washed-up alcoholic lawyer seeking one last shot at redemption, and his performance was a raw, searing portrait of a broken man fighting his way back. He finally won his Oscar for reprising his role as Fast Eddie Felsen in Newman, The Color of Money, a story of an aging hustler confronting his own past, his own compromises. The charisma was still there, but now it was layered with a profound weariness, a deep understanding of the cost of living. Can anyone ever truly escape from the shadow of their darkest moments? As the years went by, Paul Newman gracefully began to retreat from the world that had made him a legend, finding solace in passions that had nothing to do with Hollywood. His love for auto racing, discovered late in life, became more than a hobby. It was a second profession. In 1979, he achieved a stunning second-place finish in the grueling 24 Hours of Le Mans, a feat that shocked the professional racing world. He wasn't a celebrity playing at being a driver. He was a serious racer, a competitor who earned the deep respect of his peers. He went on to form a championship-winning racing team, Newman Haas Racing. This was his real world, a place of tangible results and meritocracy, a stark contrast to the ephemeral nature of fame. It was a world where his famous face meant nothing once the helmet went on. He was judged by his skill, his courage, his precision behind the wheel. The roles he chose became fewer but more poignant, each one layered with the weight of a life fully lived. His final on-screen performance in 2002's Road to Perdition was a masterpiece of quiet menace and weary regret, playing a patriarchal mob boss whose face was a roadmap of a long, complicated life. And in a fitting bookend to his career, his final performance was a voice role in the animated film Cars, playing Doc Hudson, a retired racing legend who becomes a mentor to a young hotshot. It was a story of passing the torch, a gentle farewell. His greatest joy, however, was his quiet life in Connecticut with Joanne. Their 50-year love story was the true masterpiece of his life, a partnership that had weathered fame, tragedy, and time. In his final years, as many of his contemporaries, Brando McQueen, began to pass away. A sense of quiet solitude settled over him. He faced his own mortality with the same fierce privacy that had characterized his entire life. The final battle began. A diagnosis of lung cancer. He faced it with dignity, choosing to stop treatment and spend his final months at home, surrounded by his family. He was letting go, not with a dramatic flourish, but with a gentle, courageous acceptance. Were these final decisions acts of surrender, or courageous acts of self-preservation? On September 26, 2008, Paul Newman died at the age of 83, at home in his beloved Connecticut farmhouse. The world mourned the loss of a cinematic giant, the last of a certain kind of movie star. His death was not shrouded in mystery. It was a quiet, dignified end to a life that had been anything but. But while the circumstances of his death were clear, the mysteries of his life, the private demons, the hidden pains, will forever be a source of fascination. His legacy is not just the collection of classic films he left behind, but the duality of his existence. The handsome hero and the grieving father, the Hollywood icon and the quiet philanthropist, the charming rebel and the man haunted by a lifetime of private sorrow. His greatest role was not the hustler or HUD. It was the character of Paul Newman itself. He spent a lifetime trying to be more than the face the world saw, and in doing so, he created a legacy that will outlast any film poster. The true testament to his life is Newman's own. The brand, born from a father's grief and a man's desire to do good, has to date generated hundreds of millions of dollars for charity. A staggering sum that far outweighs the financial success of his acting career. It is the living, breathing legacy of a man who found his ultimate purpose in giving, not in taking. He taught us that a life of fame and fortune can be a hollow victory, but a life of purpose and compassion is a lasting one. His story is a poignant reminder that even the most celebrated icons are simply human, wrestling with the same sorrows and seeking the same redemption as anyone else. What hidden secrets might still remain untold behind his public image? In the end, the race wasn't about winning. It was about keeping something behind him: grief, guilt, ghosts. And when the engine finally fell silent, he did not crash. He coasted, he let go. He died in silence. But maybe, just maybe, somewhere in the sound of a late-night engine roaring down a distant road, he's still chasing the only kind of peace he ever truly knew.